It's time for The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast from New York City. Noor Ibrahim, the Daily Beast Deputy World Editor. How are you?
Very well. How are you?
Good. We're waiting for May 19th. That's the day the cafes reopen. Vivian Walt, Paris correspondent for Time Magazine, has no doubt circled that date in red on her calendar. How are you?
Absolutely. I'm good. Getting better.
All right. The suspiciously tan and relaxed investigative reporter Paul Moreira, founder of documentary production company Première Ligne, is with us as well. How are you?
Good evening. I'm fine.
All right. And from Cape Town, South Africa, Lucanio Kalata, program editor for ETV News and Sports. Welcome to The World This Week.
Thank you for having me.
The World This Week, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag World This Week. It all came to a head Monday with a showdown over the expulsion of families of East Jerusalem, tear gas in the Al-Aqsa mosque, and just when Jerusalem Day tensions seemed to be subsiding, Hamas making good on an ultimatum at 6:01 p.m. local time, hitting Jerusalem with one of its rockets fired from the Gaza Strip. The attack from 75 kilometers away coming as a complete surprise and kicking off the worst fighting in 7 years and the prospect of yet another all-out war between Israel and Gaza. As we speak, Vivian Walt, there's been no ground incursion, but it's just gone from bad to worse. With this Friday as well, a new layer, what with at least 10 killed as I speak, in the West Bank after Friday prayers.
I think what's so worrying is that it's not quite like rounds of violence we've seen before. We have, often we've seen Gaza blow up and we've seen the West Bank blow up. Here we have three fronts going on at the same time. We have Gaza, the West Bank, and inside Israel, a kind of internal battle that's heating up between Israelis and Jewish Israelis and Arab Israelis. And so the whole flavor appears to be much more intense. And it doesn't seem like either side is really anywhere near a point of backing away or stepping down, and hard to see who's going to actually put in place some kind of ceasefire.
All right, there are people lying in wait for that ceasefire, but the Prime Minister making it clear, Paul Moreira, that they're not ready for one right now.
No, I think the cycle of violence is not over, but you have to realize that, I've been many times to this area, and you have to realize that what happens in East Jerusalem, this perpetual tension, and you're having far-rightist settlers, far-rightists that grab people and take them out of their houses and replace them, and it's lasting for a very long time now, and now it erupts because violence goes along the Ramadan. The Al-Aqsa mosque was in the middle of a riot.
Perfect storm.
Perfect storm, exactly. And the time has been passing. There's many examples of restrictions on Palestinians, West Bank Palestinians' freedom. So yeah, now everything is joining for a major eruption of violence. It's cyclical. It happens until the problem of like the West Bank is not solved. It will come back over and over again.
Over and over again, and some are calling it a good week for hardliners on both sides. Hamas positioning itself as defender of the cause, hot on the heels of yet another election canceled by Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas.
The more advanced the battlefield gets, the more evolved the decisions to introduce new equipment and specific weapons. We are at the beginning of the battle, but the Israeli occupation started this battle. Israel needs to comply with the conditions and demands of the resistance by getting their hands off Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa, Sheikh Jarrah and the West Bank, by lifting the siege on Gaza and ending the aggression against our people.
So Noor Ibrahim, that Hamas spokesperson claiming it's the beginning of the battle, yet Hamas also reached out for a ceasefire. So how much of that is posturing?
Bibi rejected multiple proposals for that. And I think right now, what is so important to keep in mind is that what's happening in this region, I know we talked about 3 different fights taking place at the same time, but there is one core issue here, and that is the occupation. And when you have Gaza under siege for half a century now, it's going to lead to this chain of events and, this just constant barrage of bombardment. I can't tell you if, it's posturing or not. I know there's been a lot of conversations about, who started this, who provoked that, who threw the first airstrike in. But there is a bigger, larger issue here that's been simmering for years and years. And when you have all these issues, when you have a constant occupation, when you have illegal Israeli settlements encroaching in Jerusalem, in the West Bank, when you have, what happened yesterday, entire families buried under rubble, then you just need to keep in mind that larger context here.
The larger context, and let me ask you, Noor, because we've just gone through 4 years where Donald Trump sided with the government of Benjamin Netanyahu, cutting aid to the Palestinians, moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Are people where you are as surprised as we are here as to the fact that this has erupted so suddenly?
No, and you talked about Trump, but let's be real. What has Biden done? The truth is he doesn't care. He doesn't care that over 100 civilians have been killed. He doesn't care that around 30 children have been killed so far. It didn't even warrant, a mention. You have statement after statement coming out of the White House. And, talking about Israel's right to defend itself. God forbid, we say the same thing about the Palestinians' right to defend themselves against an occupation, a brutal occupation. And the fact that it just hasn't been brought up at all, just in terms of the sheer terror, the sheer casualties that have taken place. Unfortunately, it's very much in line with, his stance on this issue over his entire political career, actually. But let's be real here. These are Israeli-launched, U.S.-funded strikes that are putting children into the ground, and that's something we can't lose sight of, I think.
Let's talk a bit about the Biden administration. Just to give a sense, the Middle East was not top of the in tray for this new administration. You'll recall that Barack Obama appointed former Northern Ireland negotiator George Mitchell as his Middle East envoy just 48 hours into his first term. Donald Trump's point man on the region was none other than his own son-in-law, Jared Kushner. And as for the new administration, well, it's had to pluck from obscurity career diplomat Hadi Amr, a deputy assistant secretary in the State Department's Bureau of Near East Affairs. Note that Biden has yet to name a new ambassador to Israel. Lucanio Calada, do you agree with Noor Ibrahim that Biden doesn't care, or it's simply that he's got other fires to put out first?
I think the issue of the Middle East, as well as America's involvement in the Middle East, is something that has been spoken about for such a long time. I think the new president of the United States is just basically towing the line, because America has for years and years and years and decades always supported Israel's right to defend itself. But Israel, with all its might, with all its power, with all its weaponry that it gets from the United States, how can it defend itself against a people that that have got so completely little, as opposed to the Israelis? And I just think that the Israelis feel emboldened to occupy Palestine. They feel emboldened to carry out these apartheid policies that they have been ratcheting up each and every year against the people of Palestine. They feel emboldened to do so because, you know, Big Brother, America, allows them and gives them the free reign, basically, to whip the Palestinians and to kill as many Palestinians as they have been doing for decades. So I just think, I mean, for us to be able to expect something different from President Joe Biden in the US is basically we'd be fooling ourselves, because this has been America's line on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for as long as I can remember.
Let me ask you, Vivian Walt, because we all remember the time Netanyahu humiliated Biden. He was vice president. He shows up in Jerusalem for peace talks. And while he's there, they announced new settlement building. It was, I think, in East Jerusalem at the time. And is it just that it's early days and that he's someone who proceeds cautiously, or does he not care?
No, I disagree with Noor that he doesn't care. I think he cares deeply, but he doesn't care in the way that obviously is needed in this situation. He cares deeply about the domestic politics that he faces over this issue. There are, you know, a whole range of different interests within the US that he has to weigh up, clearly. And
we're seeing divisions within the Democratic Party on this.
Exactly. Very strong divisions within the Democratic Party at a time when they really can't afford to be divided at all, just in terms of what's going on inside the US. I think what's a little bit baffling is why he hasn't, maybe used a couple of levers of influence that he clearly has, for example, with President Sisi of Egypt, who could be the one figure, perhaps, within the region who could be kind of brought to bear to, maybe try and effect some kind of de-escalation, if not ceasefire. That would seem to be urgent, just in terms of what Noor said. I mean,
well, Egypt has been taking in the wounded from Gaza to a certain degree. I mean, and we know there's diplomatic back channels, that we know there's stuff going on behind the scenes.
One assumes. I think we might see perhaps a little bit more when President Sisi is in Paris next on Monday. This is a moment in which Europe could actually play quite an important role. So I do think that internationally, and we'll see this, I hope, with the Security Council emergency meeting on Sunday, but internationally, different world leaders probably do have a role, and a pretty urgent one, to try and work out some kind of deal, because on the ground, clearly emotions are, at this point so heated that it's impossible to see how it kind of winds down.
And when it erupts in the Middle East, it seems to suck everybody in. Germany and France have both banned demonstrations this weekend in support of the Palestinian cause, with Emmanuel Macron's law and order interior minister pointing to incidents back in 2014 during the last Gaza war, here in the nation that is home to Europe's largest Muslim and Jewish communities.
There cannot be hateful or anti-Semitic protests in France, and my role as Minister of the Interior is to ensure that this doesn't happen, to maintain public order, and to guarantee the protection of our citizens.
There were incidents of violence and there were anti-Semitic slogans in 2014, but is that statement perhaps too harsh?
It's like Minority Report. The minister already knows that there will be anti-Semitic slurs, so you better arrest, stop the demo even before it exists. No, I think it's problematic. Obviously, I mean, if the police right in Paris recently, their tactics have been to go along the demonstrations and jump inside and arrest people who are problematic, really on a very refined and focused way. So they could do that, but I think censoring the freedom of expression about what's happening right now in Gaza is a heavy responsibility.
Mayor of Paris approves of that ban.
Yeah, but I think it doesn't fit well with the values that are claimed by France, which are freedom of expression.
One final point on this: we mentioned at the outset how it's been a good week for hardliners, Hamas feeling emboldened. It's also been a good week, you might say, for what is the caretaker prime minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who this time seemed down after a record fourth snap general election in 2 years, but he's definitely no longer out. His main rival, Yair Lapid, losing the support Thursday of Netanyahu hard-right rival, Naftali Bennett. Your thoughts on this, Paul Moreira, the fact that we said, this time Bibi's not going to come back. He's on trial for corruption.
Yes, I think it may be one of the keys to understand what's happening right now in Israel. Obviously, he's in a political crisis that is quite deep. And all of a sudden, he sends soldiers on the Aqsa mosque compound and all this war situation. We know that war usually serves the power in place, and it is probably the first benefiter of the crisis situation, because we know that the people tend to gather around the leader who will brandish the sword against the enemy and all that. So we're right in a moment like that, and I think he's benefiting from the situation, Bibi, right now.
But there is what you mentioned at the outset, though, which is these unprecedented clashes between Arab Israelis and Jews. We even heard the president of Israel warn against a civil war. That really alarmed Israelis.
Yeah, and especially given the kind of, international stance that Israel likes to project to the world of being the great democracy in this region, and the fact that Arab Israelis, who comprise 20% of the population, have the right to vote and so on. Under the surface, clearly, there's a range of, much more subtle forms of discrimination and frustrations that the Arab citizens of Israel have suffered for decades. And perhaps, one of them being the kind of separation of families through, as Noor said, half a century of occupation. So this is really a new element, which I think is quite perilous, probably, for the Israeli government.
All right, when we come back, we're going to take a look at something that perhaps is perilous for the whole planet, which is what seemed like, just a case of banditry, which could have major implications for our connected world. That cyber attack on a pipeline. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Daily Beast Deputy World Editor Noor Ibrahim is with us from the mothership in New York City, where I understand you don't have to wear masks anymore if you're vaccinated?
Yeah, it's hard for me to let go of the habit, though. I wasn't sure. I was in the cab earlier today, and I was like, But yeah, we'll get used to it.
Okay, get used to it fast, I believe. Vivian Walt, Paris correspondent for Time Magazine, is with us as well. Investigative reporter Paul Moreira, founder of the documentary production company Première Ligne, and from Cape Town, South Africa, Lucanio Calata, program editor for ETV News and Sports. With our smartphones and our connected objects, have we all become, giants with feet of clay? This week, a wind of panic sparking a run on gas stations up and down the eastern seaboard of the United States.
And then everybody's going nuts because they think it's a gas shortage, and it's not. So people are nuts.
Are they? The Colonial Pipeline, the target of cyber criminals 1 week ago It supplies nearly half the gasoline on the East Coast. Worst hit, North Carolina, where this Friday began with 72% of gas stations still dry. Colonial had to send maintenance workers on foot all along its 5,500-mile system to check before bringing its operating system back online. Colonial, which says it refused to pay, not so, counters the Bloomberg news agency. It quotes two sources as saying Colonial paid up nearly $5 million in untraceable cryptocurrency going to East European criminals in the hours that followed the ransomware attack. Lucanio Calata, what was your reaction when you first heard about this story?
Well, I think we were very shocked, when we heard about the issues of the cyber attacks coming out of the US earlier this week. We saw videos of American citizens, filling plastic bags with fuel and all of those kinds of things. But I think the reality then hit us because, Africa, there are some countries on the continent whose cybersecurity may not be as advanced as first world countries such as America. So for us down here at home, immediately there was that realization that, hey, if something like this were to happen to either one of our departments, one of our top companies in South Africa, one of our government departments, it could be really, really problematic. So and the news also coming out from Bloomberg that, this company has sort of paid a ransom, that's even scarier because it means that it might embolden these attackers to look at countries and say, okay, well, if we got them to pay, surely we could get someone else to pay. Imagine if something like that happens in a country like Zimbabwe, for instance, where that's even further behind in terms of its technology and its cybersecurity and those kinds of things. It just spells danger. It really just spells danger for us, and I think the rest of the continent, and obviously the rest of the world.
And the dirty little secret, Vivian Walt, is that they're not the first to pay. There's been others.
Well, firstly, 5 million. I mean, that's lunch money for this company. This is an $8 billion
Which put out a statement
company.
saying they were sorry. They didn't think it would cause this much damage.
I mean, 5 million, they could have asked for 50, I would think, given, the disruption to the energy supplies, the energy markets, the US stock market. But the fact is that, Lucanio was saying, if only Africa was as sophisticated in cybersecurity as the US is so far behind in cybersecurity. They're so
far behind who?
Far behind the hackers. They're always on the back foot. We're still dealing with the SolarWinds hack, which sort of ripped through the federal government and took everybody by surprise then. And I would say that. I think the US has so much catching up to do. And this week, apparently, it was the tech companies that really saved the day when they got together and found a way to kind of block the hackers and get things back online because the hackers had stored a lot of their data on US servers and they slipped up. They made a mistake and the tech companies joined together and shut down the servers.
Noor Ibrahim, we had an executive order from the U.S. president earlier this week, which basically raised the requirements on companies to improve their cyber security. What does it all tell you about the state of the United States at a time when you're talking about infrastructure and investing more?
Yes, I mean, the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee himself said the U.S. is not prepared for that. And I think it says a lot. At this point, the U.S. obviously has a very formidable, strong traditional military, but there is this movement towards cyber warfare that's becoming more and more of a threat. So if you can't even defend yourself against, criminal cyber attackers, then how are you going to do it with state-sponsored attacks? And it raises some, it's quite alarming. The head of Russia Today, I think last month, said something about, if the U.S. Were ever to go to war with Russia anytime soon, it would be this kind of cyber war where Russia would be able to shut down an entire city in the U.S. at the flip of a switch. So if that is actually the way it's headed, if that's a real possibility, then there definitely has to be more investment in this.
Paul Moreira, of course, the biggest or the most famous or notorious, depending on how you look at it, hack of this sort, though did come from the United States and we think Israel against the Iranian nuclear facility, the Stuxnet attack. So both sides know the game?
Yeah, even maybe little guys know the game. I'm going to shortly tell you a story, a true story. We were with Pedro, a cameraman in Raqqa, during the last battle against Daesh, the Islamic State. And Pedro wanted to use his drone to make some pictures of the streets in ruins. And then he cannot fly it because the US Army jams the waves, and you cannot fly a drone. It's impossible for security reasons. Then he goes on the internet. There was only one spot where you had access to the internet. And through a forum, he finds the address of a Russian hacker that could actually find a code to crack the jamming of the U.S. Army. He contacts him, gets on the internet with him, and the guy says, "Okay, I can help you. Just send me $200 through bitcoins." He had never bought bitcoins, so he was in Raqqa buying bitcoins. He paid him $200. The guy sent him a code. He punched the code in his drone, and the drone flew. So you can imagine, we were just doing pictures. So imagine we could have
How long did this take?
It took like 2 hours. 2 hours.
Wow.
And the guy was in his room, his bedroom. It was just this computer genius, and he was selling his skills for, and so that's the new world we're in. It's a little guy can just undo what the U.S. Army in the most dangerous place on earth had tried to do for security reasons.
All right, the U.S. president says he plans to engage his Russian counterpart over all of this.
We do not believe, I emphasize, we do not believe the Russian government was involved in this attack. But we do have strong reason to believe that the criminals who did the attack are living in Russia. That's where it came from. We're from Russia. We have been in direct communications with Moscow about the imperative for responsible countries to take decisive action against these ransomware networks.
I see you nodding your head vigorously, Paul.
Yeah, I think he's right. I mean, I don't see why the Russian government would do something so risky. There is there's a nebulous of hackers in Russia that make money out of their talents, and they don't need to have, a call from the Kremlin saying, do this and that. It's just a new economy, new crime economy.
All right, call it a coincidence of the calendar. You heard Paul Moreira there talking about Bitcoin. And the same week that cryptocurrency is used to pay off the folks who shut down gas stations, Elon Musk reversing an earlier decision to accept Bitcoin as payment for Tesla cars. Musk insists that it's all about saving the planet. He put out another tweet on Thursday saying, "To be clear, I strongly believe in crypto, but it can't drive a massive increase in fossil fuel use, especially coal." Vivian Walt, because what it is that you can mine for Bitcoins. And by the way, a lot of servers are hacked just to be able to mine for Bitcoin, not to steal things or for ransomware. What do you make of Elon Musk, who's moved markets this week when saying, "I like this cryptocurrency and not that one"?
Yeah, of course. And, his performance on Saturday Night Live last week moved markets, or, people were kind of waiting to see what he had to say about crypto and to see which way it would go. So, he's a kind of colorful character. In a way, he loves to provoke. By the way, you can now subscribe to Time magazine with crypto. You can pay with Bitcoin. So it's not something completely bizarre.
But is that something that's going to be are we going to have a rethink about all of this after this pipeline hack?
No, I don't think so. I think
when
that
it's so clear that these cryptocurrencies are used for malfeasance.
But that's been clear for years now. And from the very start of the whole cryptocurrency, phenomenon, organized crime seized on this as a perfect way to, trade and exchange large sums of money pretty much invisibly. And I don't think that that's going away.
Noor Ibrahim, just so you know, Saturday Night Live, that's a show for old people. But I just wanted to ask you, Elon Musk, the fact that he talks up a cryptocurrency and then talks another one down, your thoughts on this?
I just think he has such this hardcore fan base that just follows. He could say anything on a whim. Like, I remember when he just, gave a thumbs up to Signal, and suddenly there was this influx of, people signing up or downloading the app, and it was almost too much. I just think that, people love him, and he's obviously, a very smart person, but at the same time is just a little, there's something a little bit off there. I'll just say that.
All right, something a little bit off. And one final word on this, and I'll put it to you, Paul Moreira. We had a guest on Thursday saying that, because France, as you know, 75% of our power comes from nuclear plants, saying, no, the nuclear plants here, we're much better at cybersecurity than they are in the United States. He doesn't envisage that nightmare scenario where, criminals could take over the traffic light system in a city.
We are a country where the state technostructure held on to the Minitel as long as they could when the internet was being developed in America. So I don't know. I have a hard time, assessing if it's true or not. But I know that there will be weaknesses on our system.
All right, here's one for Emmanuel Macron's briefing book ahead of the French president's trip to South Africa at the end of the month. Those who assumed that Jacob Zuma would go quietly when Cyril Ramaphosa replaced him as president in 2018, well, think again. The African National Congress suspending its Secretary General, Ace Magashule, after a rearguard maneuver to challenge Ramaphosa's leadership inside the party's National Executive Council. This as Zuma fights corruption charges.
Members of the NEC have expressed concern about a concerted and a well-orchestrated as well as a well-resourced campaign to sow division and confusion in the ranks of the ANC, with the ultimate aim to destroy the movement as an instrument of progressive transformation and change.
And in this South African version of House of Cards, Magashule, since those remarks earlier in the week, taking the ANC to court over his own suspension. Before we go into the details of it, I mean, this is a party that was set up as a winning machine. It's been in power since the end of apartheid, Lucanio Kalata. Could there be a rift that tears apart the ANC as we know it?
Not at this stage, unfortunately. I think
unfortunately,
there have been several splits. Sorry?
You said unfortunately.
Yes, look, I'm saying unfortunately because there have been splits in the ANC in the past, but those were factions were just they were minor because the ANC regrouped and continued to win subsequent elections. But I think we are at a point as a country, and this will maybe explain to you why I say unfortunately, that we are at a point in our country where we realize that, the ANC is very far removed from what it is supposed to be from what it was meant to be. Just today, to make an example, just today, the Gauteng province, which is where Johannesburg is, which is where Pretoria is, which is our capital city, that province today announced that they are in the midst of a third wave, right? Now, we have a deadly virus that is making a strong resurgence in our country. And yet we have the leaders of our governing party busy fighting each other in court, fighting each other over resources, over corruption, and all of those kinds of things. So I think as a people, we're starting to understand that the ANC is no longer serving us because we're dying as a people, yet they continue to fight over resources. And we can't have that. And it is terribly unfortunate.
But if you're Cyril Ramaphosa, don't you have time for both?
There is a breakaway.
If you're Cyril Ramaphosa, don't you have time for both? Fighting the pandemic and, well, he portrays it as an anti-corruption drive.
It may be an anti-corruption drive. It may be an anti-corruption drive. But the problem that what we're seeing is that the entire ANC, not just some people or certain factions of it, the entire ANC is corrupt. I wish we actually had more time to get into things. My father was a political activist that was killed by the apartheid government in 1985. The ANC has been in power for 27 years in this country. And yet they still have not done enough to prosecute the people that were responsible for the murders of my father and his colleagues. That is just one issue, right? And then there's 500 billion rand, right, that the ANC in government had set aside to fight the coronavirus pandemic. A large chunk of that money has disappeared and nobody knows where that money has gone. So it's not just Ace Magashule or Jacob Zuma or it's the whole collective of them. The whole collective. The ANC is rotten from the top right through to the bottom.
And yet, Vivian Walt, how will it go when Macron visits South Africa at the end of the month? What will the story that will play here?
I think that for a very long time, obviously, South Africa was like this beacon of hope. I mean, the sort of miraculous rainbow nation, and the ANC sort of embodied that. It was the movement that became the government, and it was for a very long time Mandela's party. And, as like Cunha says, it's been 26 years. The vast majority of South Africans at this point do not have a real living experience of what apartheid once was. It's a young country. What do they want? They want power 24 hours a day. They want to know when they turn on their light switch at home, electricity comes on. They want jobs. There's been an economic crisis that has been going on for years. And so it's hard to see what France's role is. I mean, certainly Europe as a whole needs to invest heavily. There needs to be trade. But as long as you don't really get a handle on state corruption, it's always going to be at a handicap.
All right, and that issue of state capture, as it's called in South Africa, or good governance is going to be one of the topics next week. There's going to be an Africa summit here in Paris. Vivian Walt, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank Paul Moreira, Noor Ibrahim in New York City, Lucanio Kalata in Cape Town. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.